Welcome back, everyone. We're here today with episode 1951 of the Cabral Concept, reviewing a big research study that just came out and going over the right way to eat to balance your female hormones and PCOS. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break down the study. Very, very strange outcome to this study, but it can certainly teach us a lot. And I would say probably more than the study even intended. So I look forward to going over that with you today. Please always do let me know if there's any additional questions, any comments I can help with. My team and I are always happy to help. And one other thing that I always want to share with you is that in terms of female hormones, it differs a little bit from individual to individual. And what we're talking about today is not necessarily estrogen dominance or a thyroid-based imbalance, although this is going to apply for sure, thyroid imbalances. But what we want to talk about is actually high testosterone and high androgens in women that can lead to facial hair growth or body hair growth in women. It can lead to a more developed jawline or over the eyebrows. It can lead to thinning of the hair on the top of the head, oily skin, adult acne, increased anger, rage, and so much more. So that is high androgens. If you've experienced anything like that in your life or with any of your loved ones, that this is definitely the show that you were going to want to be able to pass on. And if you ever want to test, so a lot of people are unsure if that's them or not, there's a test called the Stress Hormones, Mood, and Metabolism Test. And you can do it right at home. I'm going to link it up today at stephencabral.com/1951. That will be a test that you can do, again, right at home that looks at your cortisol levels, thyroid levels, estrogen, progesterone, DHEA, testosterone, insulin, vitamin D, and hemoglobin A1C, which is a fancy way of saying, what's your blood sugar been like over the last 90 days or so? Okay, so let's get right into the show. I'm also going to link up the research. So I'm going to keep it easy. All of the show notes today will be at stephencabral.com/1951. So the research study that I will link up to really looked at two different ways of eating and how does that help or hurt high levels of androgen and female hormone imbalances, namely PCOS-based women that are suffering from those particular symptoms that I talked about. Now, what they did was very interesting, though, because they based it off two standard American diet breakfasts. So they actually wanted to say, what happened to the human body, these women, after they ate? Okay, and let's go over the subjects. So the test subjects, the patients essentially in this study were there were 15 of them, ages 19 to 39 years old, and they had a BMI ranging from 19.9 to 53, like way all over the place, right? 7 of the subjects were normal weight, 3 were overweight, which just means a BMI between 25 and 30, and 5 are obese, and that's a BMI greater than 30. If you don't know what a BMI is, we'll link up that podcast today as well. Everybody should know what their BMI is. So that's literally free and easy to figure out. I will link up how to do that in the show notes here today as well. So basically what we're looking at is about half of the people overweight or obese and half the people at a so-called, normal weight. And we're just looking at BMI. And then they split the two subjects, the two groups, between a high fat, lower carbohydrate, lower protein meal, and I'll go over exactly what that is, versus a low fat, higher carb, higher fiber meal. And what did that do to their hormones, specifically testosterone, after they ate these meals in the morning? And believe me, you're gonna, I don't know, I found it a little shocking of what they used for nutrition. But again, they are following what's called the SAD diet, the standard American diet, which is highly processed, highly inflammatory, not good for the human body, but it is fast food and it's inexpensive for the most part. And unfortunately, it's what's marketed to the majority of the population, which is why we have now 70% of the people overweight in the United States, 33% of kids. We have health-based issues at an all-time high, autoimmune at an all-time high, cancer at an all-time high. And really, with all of our medical-based technology, we don't see it reversing or declining. We're able to keep people alive longer. However, their quality of life is going down and down and down after, especially the age of around 40, 45 years old. And people are, again, like 1 out of 2 adults is essentially medicated or will be throughout their life. And so it's really, it's too bad. And so much of it starts with our nutrition and our food. And it starts with our education when we're younger. I can just tell you, again, I'm no different. I grew up drinking Kool-Aid every morning. I ate Little Debbie snacks. I used to eat Fruity Pebbles and Frosted Flakes, and I loved it. I ate Twinkies. I ate raspberry Twinkies. I drank Crystal Light because I thought that was healthier somehow than Kool-Aid when I started to grow up. So you have to realize, again, a lot of us as kids, well, we're not taught this for sure in school, right? And if our parents didn't know it, well, who are we supposed to learn it from, right? So that's the big thing. So my goal is to teach you, and then one day, or maybe today, you teach your children about it, and we kind of break this cycle, because you don't need to spend a lot of money in order to eat healthy, okay? A lot of good organic foods do cost a little bit more, but we can at least still make better choices. There's no doubt about that. All right, let's check this out. So I'm gonna pull up the study right now, and I'm gonna give you the end results. And then I'm gonna tell you what I believe they missed overall as a big part of this study. But that's because they weren't necessarily looking in this direction. And that's why, really, really important that we start to look from 2 things as an integrative health practitioner, and rather just, looking overall at the specific outcomes of this as well. Okay, so let's dive right into it. The study is on PubMed, and it is called Comparison of Hormonal and Metabolic Markers After a High-Fat Western Meal versus a Low-Fat, High-Fiber Meal in Women with Polycystic Ovary Syndrome. All right, so again, this could go any woman with high levels of androgens, but specifically PCOS. And again, I think it applies to many, many other women out there. So here are the results. Testosterone decreased within 2 hours after both meals. So whether it was high fat or a high carb meal, testosterone decreased by 27% within 2 hours after both meals. However, testosterone remained below pre-meal values for 4 hours in the higher carbohydrate meal and 6 hours after the higher fat meal. Insulin was 2-fold higher for 2 hours after the high carb meal compared with the high fat meal. So insulin was double that of the high fat meal, which makes sense. We'll talk about that in a moment. Glucose was higher for 1 hour, just 1 hour, in the higher carbohydrate meal than with the high fat meal. And DHEA was decreased, which is a precursor to testosterone, was decreased 8 to 10% within 2 to 3 hours after both meals. So that's it. Okay. So, and then the last big one that I need to bring you as well, because we're going to be talking about this, cortisol decreased over the 6-hour period after both meals. Okay. So you read that, you hear it. Well, what are the big takeaways? Well, the big takeaways are this: the higher fat meal, now, but don't take this too far yet. The higher fat meal decreased testosterone the same way as the higher carbohydrate meal, the same exact numbers. However, it lasted 2 hours longer than the higher processed carbohydrate meal. And it's important to say the word processed. And insulin was higher after the higher carbohydrate processed meal than the higher fat meal. So what does all that mean? Well, it means we got less blood sugar spike, which then correlates with less of a testosterone boost, less of a testosterone spike, right? Because we want to keep levels of blood sugar balanced whenever you're dealing with PCOS or higher levels of androgens such as testosterone. But here's the kicker though. Let's actually talk about what they ate, because this is going to shock you. So the high fat meal was comprised of 62% fat, 24% carbs, 1 gram of fiber, and about 14% protein. Okay, so that's not too wild, right? If you look at that, you'd say, well, that's not too crazy. 62 fat, 24 carbs, 14 protein, not too out of the ordinary, until you realize what they ate and they fed these women each day was a Jimmy Dean sausage, egg, and cheese croissant with a whole milk on the side, right? So again, I don't think a lot of us need to be, schooled in nutrition to know that a fast food, inflammatory Jimmy Dean sausage breakfast sandwich with a glass of whole milk that comes from a cow that has the highest level of an IgG sensitivity, food sensitivity out there, is going to be highly inflammatory. However, this was the high-fat meal they chose because this is not an abnormal breakfast choice on the standard American diet. Okay, so it is what it is. Now let's go to the higher carbohydrate meal. So this was only 6% fat. I mean, it's difficult to only get 6% fat in a meal. I mean, I don't know many people who can keep it to 6%. I mean, that means that you literally have to choose low-fat items. And then there's 81% carbs. I don't think most people go 81% carbs for most of their meals, unless they're drinking like fruit juice or a beverage with it. But it did have 27 grams of fiber. And that's a lot of fiber. So that was the saving grace to this particular meal and why it still worked. And that's because there was so much fiber to offset all of those carbs that it didn't allow for that big spike in blood sugar. And there was 13 grams of protein. So basically, protein stayed exactly the same. They switched the carbs and the fat in terms of the caloric intake for the most part. I could give a big breakdown on calories, but honestly, you don't need to know it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you now what that high carbohydrate meal. This was a low-fat, high-fiber meal that contained Fiber One cereal with 1% milk, Dannon fat-free, fruit-flavored yogurt, plus fiber, and a fruit salad containing apple and banana. Okay, so what we have here is highly processed breakfast cereal, right? We're talking about wheat cereal, gluten cereal, also highly inflammatory. If you put it in your hands and you squish it together like this, it turns into dust. It gets digested way too quick. Those are not the type of carbohydrates I recommend, nor do most true health professionals. And again, no disrespect to what a lot of conventional medicine teaches, but when you have your clients on, processed cereal for breakfast and chocolate milk, it's just not a good idea, okay? So we're looking at, again, processed, fat-free, fruit-flavored yogurt. That means sugar added, right? And then luckily, we've got a lot of fiber. And we've got the apple and the banana, and believe it or not, that actually helped to slow the glycemic response of this processed cereal. So neither one of these meals will be considered healthy. However, in this particular case, the lower carb, higher fat allowed for less of a blood sugar spike. And because of that, there was less of an insulin-based response. And also, both then decreased testosterone levels after breakfast, and after 2 hours, the testosterone response kept going lower, stayed lower with the higher fat diet. Now, this is the most interesting part that I think was overlooked. And then I'm going to give you what a much better example would have been, like a much better case. This is, even though neither one of those breakfasts are healthy, this diet or this particular study led to something that I don't even think that they were aware of. It's that eating breakfast decreases androgen response in the morning. Let me repeat that. Eating breakfast, at least with this study, and again, my clinical practice, I'll back it up in just a second, eating breakfast decreases androgen response in women, especially with PCOS. And I find that remarkable because for so many women, we keep telling them skip breakfast, skip breakfast, skip breakfast. And I don't have an issue with going a little bit longer in the morning, but if you're already under stress and you already have higher levels of cortisol and you already have higher levels of testosterone, because that's what your body moves towards, you already have dysregulated blood sugar, believe it or not, skipping breakfast, even though in your mind it makes sense because we're going to tap into more body fat, right? Well, no, we're not. If we have higher levels of cortisol, lower levels of thyroid because of the stress response, and higher levels of testosterone, because it leads to greater amount of inflammation in the body, which then allows for what? Well, it allows your body or enables your body or forces your body to hold more water. You become puffier, you become more swollen, and you start to deal with even deeper levels of lowered metabolism, weight gain, and honestly, metabolic resistance, where you're not able to burn the body fat off. And in my clinical practice, I see the same exact thing. Most women need breakfast. Men actually do a better job at being able to go longer without eating than women, and there are many hormonal reasons because of that. And I've spoken about that before on my intermittent fasting podcast. So I'll link up all the intermittent fasting podcasts below at stephencabral.com/1 1951. You can learn about who intermittent fasting is right for and who it isn't. By the way, it's right for everybody. It's just the length of the time changes depending on the individual and the already pre-existing health conditions that they have. So what do we learn? Believe it or not, eating breakfast is highly beneficial for any woman with female hormone imbalances, and I would add cortisol and thyroid to that as well, and PCOS. Can't recommend it enough. Now, do I recommend eating a Jimmy Dean breakfast sandwich and glass of milk? Absolutely not. Do I recommend sitting down to a bowl of cereal and processed yogurt? Absolutely not. What I recommend, and I'm not even going to give you the exact breakfast, I have many podcasts on this. I recommend a much more moderate approach. You're going to focus on an anti-inflammatory breakfast, one that is going to be much more moderate in terms of its levels of macros, as at least at a place to start. And you can, if a place to start, again, we're not big believers in counting calories or counting macros. We don't feel that you need it. We've done this now for over 20 years, worked with 250,000 people. But if you're looking just for overall macros, we're going to be looking at around 30% fat. We're going to be looking at around 50% carbs. Now, hold on one second. High fiber, mainly vegetables when we're looking to lose weight, but that's a show for another day, and around 20% or so protein. So we actually have programs that are going to teach you how to work on your body's ability to process carbohydrates at a better level. Because we know, if you go back to my anti-inflammatory show and my top 7 foods that prevent cancer, we're looking at them from a fruits and vegetable-based perspective. So we know we can't go super, super high fat and then push out all of the great produce that we need in our body and our diet to be able to make sure that we're healthy, not just for today, but for the next 20, 30, 50 years. So that's really what we want to look at. But again, I don't want the show to be about macros. It's certainly not. There's a time and place to go higher fat, a little lower carb in the beginning. We do that with our Fatlocity program. We do that with our functional medicine detox. So believe me, I'm about customizing the right program for the individual based on where they're at. And yes, people with higher levels of blood sugar and weight gain issues need to start at predominantly more vegetables in their diet as their carbs, and then begin to strategically and tactically start to work in some of those great low glycemic berries, and then eventually a little bit of sweet potatoes. I talk about that more on my previous podcast, so we'll link up many of those here today. But the good news is this. We're not going to follow a standard American diet. We're going to follow a more moderate approach, anti-inflammatory foods. Don't worry about counting your calories, especially in the beginning, or even your macros. Focus on good quality whole food, and begin to then realize that maybe, just maybe, skipping breakfast is not the best for you if you have female hormone imbalance or PCOS. Hopefully this was helpful. All of the show notes today over at stephencabral.com/1951. Hopefully this was helpful. If it was, please do feel free to share it with anyone else you believe it could serve.